Good morning. Thank you guys for Good morning. Thank you guys for joining us. This session is about embracing a multi-generational society and what that kind of looks like in all the areas of our world. Pew Research found that an estimated 60 million Americans live in a multi-generational household today, which puts it right around 1 in 6 Americans. So we have a great panel today, and to kick things off, I'm going to have our panel introduce themselves and maybe at a very high level talk about how you're kind of seeing these effects play out in your industry.
Hi, good morning. My name is Patty Patterson, and I am the Regional Communications Director for the Social Security Administration for the Atlanta region here in Atlanta. And I appreciate you guys being here this morning, and just to talk a little bit about the important role that Social Security plays in all of our lives. Social Security is really, a lot of us think of it just as a retirement program, but it's really with you throughout your whole life. It has valuable disability and survivor protection. And so I think as we enter in our discussion this morning, we can talk about the importance of it throughout the multi-generations. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Louise. I'm the Director for Financial Security at the U.S. Department of the Treasury based out of Washington. The Treasury Department really works to promote a strong and vibrant economy for all Americans. And we do that through a number of different ways, and particularly my focus is around building household financial security. That starts with financial capability and financial education, and we're very pleased to work with other agencies across the government to promote financial education and financial skills across the life cycle. There's lots of different agencies that have a piece of that, whether it's Social Security Administration or all the way to the Department of Defense, which works on the well-being of their service members and their financial readiness, to regulatory agencies that work to make sure that financial products and services are fair and delivered appropriately. We also work to promote financial security by encouraging the provision of financial products and services that help diverse Americans meet their financial needs, whether those are sort of just getting started in managing your money on a day-to-day basis, to dealing with debt, including student debt, to planning and saving for the future. And I think that's maybe something that we can talk a little bit about. We're also really aware that emerging technology is something that can play a huge role in meeting diverse needs. And maybe we can talk more about that as we go through. But I do also want to touch on the fact that through our work, we increasingly realize that that the financial education research is bearing out that there's a lot of different ways to build financial skills and knowledge across the lifespan. Research is showing us that parents can help children even before they enter school learn the basics of self-discipline, of saving for a rainy day that can serve them well in later life. And that goes all the way through. The research is showing us more and more about how young adults in their first job can start to save and manage their money and have hope for the future. And then that goes all the way through the work life and into retirement. And we talk a lot about helping people, so I won't steal Patty's thunder, about not just understanding when to claim your Social Security benefits, how to manage in retirement, and also how to protect older Americans who might be vulnerable, financially vulnerable. Maybe we can talk more about that.
Leroy?
Good morning. I'm Leroy Abraham. I'm the area president for the North Central Alabama area for Regions Bank. So that covers Birmingham and Montgomery and surrounding cities, and responsible for about 122 branches and lots of people associated with that. When I think about the banking industry, I think as an industry, we've always recognized that we cannot be stronger as organizations than the communities we serve. I think if you look back through the financial crisis, you could argue that there were organizations that lost sight of that and got caught up in the heady days of trying to make more money and trying to do things which did not really serve everybody's interests well. I think what we've learned, hopefully as an industry, certainly as an organization, is looking out from that is that we've got to be very concerned with with how well prepared our markets are to handle the financial services that we provide. We've got to be less interested in doing things that just make money. It's not a sustainable strategy. We focus on something we call shared value, where whatever we do has to be good for the customer, has to be good for the associate, has to be good for the community, good for the shareholder. And any strategy that shortchanges one of those constituents in favor of something else is probably not a sustainable strategy. And so, looking at how that plays out across multi-generational lines in terms of who we hire and retain and how we serve people, I think is going to make for an interesting discussion.
That's great.
Good morning. My name is Sonia Booker, and I am an entrepreneur and the managing partner of a company called RSG Capital Management. And what we seek to do is to provide affordable housing options and really address real estate opportunities and look at the whole multi-generational. How do the baby boomers, being the second largest generation now, and how the millennials kind of coexist in communities and have the same options to housing has become a very interesting model. So that's what I'm here to add to the discussion, and I think that me being an X generation baby right in the middle of the two, find myself in an interesting dynamic of really bridging the gap of this whole idea of social entrepreneurship and social impact that the millennials want to make. How do we build communities around that that's sustainable for everybody?
Great. And my name is Fifi. I think I totally forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of our session. I'm an executive editor at McKinsey, and I'll be your moderator today. And as a note of housekeeping, I unfortunately have to run right at 11. So my wonderful colleague Tess is going to come up and do the Q&A portion with the audience a little bit later. But Leroy, I want to go back to what you were saying, with the Great Recession, because in addition to kind of societal changes, we're seeing people live longer. We are seeing more immigrants who have historically come from multi-generational households. But really we saw this kind of trend grow during the recession when people couldn't find work, and both millennials and the silent generation had to move in with boomers at home, and we kind of really saw that grow then. Can you talk a little bit about, in the time since, what you guys have learned and how you guys are kind of changing your approach to engaging with this community that's now sort of more diverse than ever in age and socioeconomic background? So how has the recession kind of shaped that, and what's changed?
I think it's a great question, and it's hard to understate the impact of the recession, and that coming at a time when we've got all the generational changes that we've had. If you look back, we were very intentional at some point about saying, we've got to focus on racial diversity in the workplace. Then we have to focus on gender diversity in the workplace. Well, guess what? I mean, from a standpoint of generational diversity, that's happening whether we want to focus on it or not. It's there, and as you described, it's happening in households. It happens in the workforce. Sonia made the point about millennials being focused on kind of purpose-driven organizations. So we're seeing more of that. We are seeing more opportunities where you have younger associates that are managing older associates, or individuals in the in different in different age groups that are working together as peers and needing to learn from each other. And some are bringing, everybody's just bringing different things to the table, and it's. I think it's a challenge, but it's a great opportunity as well. Some of the challenges are recruiting and retaining talent. So it's not only a money issue, it's what sort of organization, what's your purpose? And people want to be a part of something that's meaningful now. I think there's much more focus on life-work balance than there used to be. Whereas people don't want to sign up to say, I'm going to work 60 hours a week every week. They're expecting some balance. They're expecting, and frankly, I think that's very healthy, but it's also very different from some folks who have been older in the workforce. So folks are less patient. Sometimes they need more recognition. More opportunities to advance and be able to show they're making progress. So all those things need to be incorporated now.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too, with the sort of benefits that you provide, especially with the millennials. They're not just wanting a pay increase, which historically has sort of been the recognition of, moving up, but now they're kind of wanting more of this flexibility and sort of all these other benefits that previously weren't as front and center. Patty, I want to talk about that opportunity for cross-generational learning. I suspect that as we see more multi-generational households, things like retirement and financial planning, Louisa, I think it's interesting because now you have 3 different points of view sometimes in one household. Are you seeing that because millennials might be living with their grandparents or even their parents, that they're starting to care about this more? There's more conversation between these communities, and how is that kind of playing out now?
Well, I think you make a good point, and as I mentioned, just take the example, whereas we all know a lot of young people maybe after college are moving back in with their parents or for whatever circumstances, so you may have several different generations within a household, or perhaps you're dealing with ailing parents or grandparents that you now, no matter what your age, are responsible for and having to take care of. So the Social Security income is a real help when you think about if you have parents or grandparents and who's going to take care of them and where are you going to get the money to do that. So I think some of the different generations are realizing the importance of how much Social Security can help with that, because if you didn't have that, whether it be a retirement income or a survivor income, if a wage earner dies and then you've got children and a wife, where are you going to get that money to pay for that? So Social Security just plays a large part in caring for all the generations. Now, one thing that I would like to mention, even for younger people who may say, oh, I'm not going to be worrying about that now, but really, I think that we're seeing, and we were talking ahead of time, I think that you are concerned about and seeing what your parents and grandparents are doing and so you're planning for your own future. So one of the things that Social Security that we're doing and encouraging everyone, and I encourage all of you and anyone that you interact with, is to sign up for a My Social Security account. That's a personal account where you can do a lot of things. If you are not getting benefits, say you're young and you want to think about your future, you can get your Social Security statement, so that you can see what you would get when you get retirement age, or should you become hopefully not disabled or you die, and what your survivors can get. It is a great financial planning tool. So you can kind of use some of our estimators, our calculators. As Louisa said, think about your whole retirement planning. That's a critical part. Now, if you are getting benefits, say you're getting a retirement benefit and you need a 1099, an estimate of your benefit, you want to get a replacement Medicare card, there's just a lot of functions, and we're adding more all the time that you can do through your My Social Security account. And so I encourage all of you to use that function, and even we are rolling out in some states. I know a lot of you, sometimes you might need to get a replacement Social Security card, and we're incrementally getting to where you can also do that through your My Social Security account. So I think, as I said earlier, Social Security is not just a retirement program. When you think about the value that it adds, the disability and survivor protection that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah.
So it's really an important program throughout your life.
Yeah. Louisa, I'm sure this is playing out in the way we approach sort of fiscal education and policy. Talk about, the effects of this multiple generation on how we approach that.
It's a good question, and I think it clearly is a trend of more and more people living in multi-generational families. And also, I think that meshes very well, as you were saying, as sort of cultural diversity.
Yeah.
I actually think there's less happening than you might expect to see, and I think there's certainly more room for innovation in that space. We know that financial education and financial capability works best when it's really about helping connect individuals to their own financial goals and connecting the goals to the action. Like, how do you take action toward goals? And I think what we're seeing is that those goals are increasingly diverse. I like to say, we used to think of retirement as like, okay, you go live on a golf course and play golf. Well, lots of people, that's not their retirement goal. Increasingly more, there's lots of different goals. And whether it's supporting your family, whether it's supporting your family back in your home country, whether it's starting a business. And I think the tools have caught up with the goals. I think the tools haven't caught up with the level of decision making.
Yeah.
So we actually are not, a lot of financial education and counseling is still very much one person.
Yeah.
And, or maybe a couple, but it's not multi-generational. And I think there's a lot more room to talk about, how do you talk to your children, whether they're children or they're adult children, about managing their money? How do you think about, and we've done a little bit of work on protecting seniors, so how do you protect your parents or your grandparents from possible financial exploitation? But I think there's lots more room for innovation in that space of realizing that not just our people's financial choices are complex, but how they're making decisions and who they're making decisions with is increasingly complex.
Sonia, I'm going to bring you in because this is right in the vein of what you do and talking to people about wealth management. Talk about how, as a society, our priorities in this area have shifted, and how maybe what the learnings are from one generation to the next, and how you're kind of maybe having to tailor your message and tweak how you've approached this in the past to deal with these multiple generations coming to you for this advice.
Well, I think that it's very key that the conversation around financial literacy has to be had so differently. And it is important that everybody understand what's the goals, what are we focusing on, and what's tomorrow. It's kind of like, do you plan to be here tomorrow? What about the day after? It's kind of like, everybody's going, yeah. But they're not living and planning like they're going to be here.
We're living so much longer, as a society.
And you're living so much longer. And so having those conversations, and what I find is that people really need a level of inspiration to say that, you're living your life with your business and, home ownership or whatever you're doing, your American dream. It allows me to aspire to do the same, because now I have this kind of example of what makes you tick and your life. But then you have to couple that with the information. But now I'm kind of like this fertile soil, because now I want to receive it to say, okay, this is great. I want home ownership. I see the value in that. I want, money for my kids' college, or money for this, my aging parent. Long-term disability or long-term care. I'm more open to a lot of conversation once I understand and I'm able to see kind of a direct impact of what that means for me.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, the soil becomes fertile, and then I'm able to put together my plan and not like the Joneses' plan of my life and my future. And it makes me work that much harder, because it's something attainable. Now I'm empowered to do, to walk out my life and my future for my family and my aging parents and my, sandwich generation and all the madness that we have, going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting you raised, home ownership and this idea of the American dream. You read with millennials, they are increasingly buying less and less interested in home ownership. I wonder, for the whole panel, how are you seeing this kind of change? Because this has been such a cornerstone of what we define as the American dream and what we save for and borrow and lending. I mean, talk about now that there's this huge generation in our society that's not as interested in this. What are the implications of that?
Well, let me just say, let me go first to say that the implications are huge.
Yeah.
Home ownership and real estate is our core.
Yeah.
That's a foundation that we have. And what I find, because I'm working on a model right here in the city of Atlanta that we hope to be a millennial model that is taken all over the U.S. that is really informing millennials on the power and the resources of ownership, because they've kind of gotten away from it and the message has gotten a little tainted. And so why should you do that? We have a group of millennials that are buying in the city, that are starting businesses in the city, that understand what this equity means and the value of buying in urban areas that are increasing and wanting to live around Beltline and walk communities. So a lot of it, what I find, is that information is missing. There's a missing link of why this is important.
Yeah.
We haven't told that story.
Yeah.
And the more we're getting, coming in contact with it.
Yeah.
I think Sonia makes a great point because there's a whole generation that's lived through watching their parents not being able to sell a house, or seeing neighbors foreclosed, or seeing families, split apart because of financial issues, and so they have looked at home ownership, at least some, as more of a burden and something that limits flexibility, as opposed to really a stepping stone and a pillar of building financial stability and wealth. And what you're talking about, you're kind of changing that narrative, or at least adding to it, so that they can see there's more there, because the implications are serious.
Yeah.
We've seen decrease in household formation. People are taking longer before they go out on their own, and that's got serious economic impacts to it. Another thing that we haven't talked about that a lot of our younger folks are facing is student debt. So it's tougher to say I'm ready to take on the responsibility of buying a house when I step out of school and I've already got a mortgage. So all these things are out there, and I think the job that all these ladies are doing is really, really important, because the more you can bring education to bear and people understand what the implications are, they can make better choices and be able to move forward, as opposed to be sort of paralyzed by fear a little bit.
Yeah. Are you guys seeing that with sort of especially the student debt and financial planning?
I would say I think the data is still out a little bit on the trend. I mean, clearly there are lots of cases where young people have delayed or put off buying homes, and certainly the student debt is absolutely weighing heavily on this generation. It's hard to know. I think there's a lot of very reasoned debate on how big that impact is, and whether it's something that it's just going to be a delay versus not happening at all. I think the lesson, though, I take away from that is that it is probably worth revisiting what are people's financial goals, what are their life goals, and what are the assets that help them reach that. I mean, traditionally, housing has been a very valuable asset for many, many Americans. And if it's not housing, what is the asset? And of course, education has also been an asset. I mean, I think we forget, because there's so much conversation about student debt, a college degree is an incredibly powerful asset, but it also comes with a lot of debt for a lot of people. So I think it sort of gives us this opportunity to have a more rich conversation about what are the assets and liabilities that help you get to your goals, whether it's a house and a family and the traditional American dream, or it's entrepreneurship and living the bohemian lifestyle.
Right. Oh, I'm going to actually turn it over to my colleague Tess. But before I go, I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on, this sandwich generation, or this gap generation. We hear Gen X is sort of always the forgotten generation, and now they're kind of front and center, being in the middle of taking care of aging parents and growing children, whether they're young or even kind of entering college. So I think that'll be interesting to hear just how we're seeing that play out in that generation.
Well, one thing I did want to add to what Louise has said, really when you're talking about your financial goals, whatever they are, and I talked a little bit about the importance of Social Security, but you have to think beyond that. We all know that will be there. That is one piece of it, but certainly it's not going to be all that you need. Really, you can only count on that being about 40% of your income, and I think what we're seeing is less and less companies have a pension. It's more a self-driven, IRA, 401, whatever. So really, for all generations, when you are determining your financial goal, you've got to look at not only what those goals are, but how you're going to achieve them. And we also talked a little bit, I think, about how much longer that we're living. I mean, if you think about you want to retire, you don't want to work. Now, some people may want to work longer, but in your 60s, late 60s or 70s, you might live another 20 or 25 or 30 years after that. So how are you going to sustain yourself with an income to hopefully have a healthy, long retirement throughout that whole rest of your life?
Well, I think that's a good jumping off point to talk a little bit about this idea of sandwich generation. And I think sandwich generation is not so much about an age or a cohort. It's really about where you are in the life cycle, right? This idea of you have children, whether they're young children or adult children, and you are looking to take care of older adults. And I think I think, you know, all the data bears out that those are the folks who are definitely feeling the pinch. I mean, sort of across every measure of financial security, if you have children, you are in trouble. So, but you probably all know that. You know, I think especially as more and more people are heading into later life with fewer assets, more debt, and longer lifespans, I think more and more people are going to see that they may have some role in financially supporting their parents or older generations. And I think for a lot of Americans whose parents had pensions, had, you know, good wage jobs, that wasn't an issue. I think that's changing as the baby boomers, you know, more and more don't have that. And, you know, at the same time dealing with children. You know, just a couple of data points though on Generation X and these middle generations. You know, I think they're more secure than the younger generations in some regards in sort of managing their day-to-day money, making the accounts balance. But the folks who are sort of most worried about running out of money in retirement are those ages 35 to 54. Maybe they're worried because they see it and, you know, younger people aren't thinking about it. But I think it's pretty striking that those are the folks who are really sort of worried about the distant future. And I don't, you know, I think that's also a generation, it's not just the millennials, but also the Gen X who lost a lot of housing wealth in the recession, because that's who was sort of young and buying houses. And I think it is worth thinking about how that set of folks is going to prepare for the life that they have ahead. I don't know, Sonia, you had...
Well, I'm a Gen X, and I feel I'm sandwiched. I have a 7-year-old and a 70-year-old mom. So I definitely, you know, feel that crunch, but luckily had, you know, a grandfather, grandparents who kind of instilled this whole idea of entrepreneurship in me very young, and I was introduced to a lot of financial concepts and investing and, you know, the power of real estate and the power of equity and all this at a very young age to have been able to prepare, you know, being in that 35 to 54 range of being swooshed. What I will say that I think from a data perspective that makes this really interesting is that there's $6 trillion in equity, in home equity among baby boomers. It's the most, you know, amount of money over student debt, over all of our big numbers that we think are big. We have all this equity out here. And so, you know, we have this opportunity to educate, you know, our family members and say, hey, mom, you know, don't leave me the house when you pass away. Like, tap into that money now and enjoy life, and I'd rather see you do something with that money than wait and leave me a house that's worth $250,000. Like, that's great, but it's making us make these choices and look, but it requires information. It requires that we have this information to know that, you know, is a reverse mortgage the worst thing in the world? It got a lot of, you know, bad press. Is, you know, a home equity line for your parents to travel so that it takes the burden off you if there's another source that you can tap into as a crunched person. So all of this becomes information, and I really think that, you know, my quest and my commitment is, you know, through books I write and blogs and all of that, is to really provide this information that I think moves the needle, because I'm naive to think that the more we know, the better decisions we can make, and the, you know, the more we can grow our wealth and our financial future. And so that's, you know, what I aim to do from a first-hand person who feels it and understands. I also think that being in this middle generation puts us in a, you know, we're the smallest, you know, more forgotten generation, but it gives us a little bit of a advantage from my perspective, because we get to take all this tradition that we've seen and understand what works well in there, what didn't work well, and then we get to take all this technology and this new ideology and bring it to a point where we're pulling from both and leveling it all out. So I think that that's the advantage that, you know, we get. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. Great points. The only thing I would add is that I think one of the biggest challenges for wherever you, if you're in the sandwich, is that you realize that you have now become vulnerable to poor decisions that might be made by your parents, as well as poor decisions that could be made by your children. And you become the buffer to correct or adjust or to fix what's happened on either side of you. So that makes the planning part that much tougher, because anytime there's a hiccup, you're the person that both sides have to come to.
Yeah.
So,
So that's a great segue. So we've heard a lot from the panelists today. We've got roughly about 8 to 9 minutes left. Would we like to open up for questions so the dialogue is two-way and engaging? Sure. Okay. So does anyone on the floor, I know some of you have just joined us, have any questions for the panelists, statements to make? Yes, sir.
Well, you hit it on the head. So I tried to say that I'm probably one of the few famous ones. I got a few of you in here, I just briefly, because we don't have a short period of time, I'm trying to get to a point. I'm a grandfather. I've got 2 grown grandsons. I'm trying to push through to see if they become successful. What I understood, what I see in them, it took them a little longer to mature. When I came out, high school, I was ready to go. I went to my school, and I graduated in 4 years, and I, had my career and all this kind of stuff. And it took them a little longer. School, the money's going up. What I didn't hear you all talk very much about was this business for self thing that I don't see here. I came up during the W.E.B. Du Bois time when parents would say, go to school, be a lawyer, be a doctor, go in the corporate world and all that stuff. And I missed Booker T. Washington deal about go into business for yourself and make money and become a millionaire. I missed that. And so I didn't have anybody to tell, I wasn't in business, I didn't have anybody to mentor, to tell my Generation X kids to do anything such as that. Okay, my grandkids don't have anybody to do that. And what I see right now is that we need more of business for self. Gen Xers, millennials, to be in business for self. And you may not have to spend that $100,000 in education if you think more about business for self. You need more mentoring. So I would like to...
Oh, you want me to answer that? I will try, but I think my colleagues here might have a better answer. I think it's a really good point, and I think this idea of sort of investing in yourself as a human capital resource and as a way of growing income and growing wealth, just what you said, I think you said it exactly right. I think our economy is going more and more toward that type of work. I think more and more people are self-employed, the gig economy. I think too, our systems, and maybe Leroy can talk about this, and I know Patty can talk about, is what are the sort of ancillary support systems around that as well. It's great to be an entrepreneur, but you also still have to remember to pay your Social Security taxes. Are you saving for retirement? Are you insuring yourself, right? I mean, I think, and should we be thinking about those things as we encourage entrepreneurship? Or should we just focus on entrepreneurship first and then kind of hope those things work out later? I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's an issue that we more and more need to be looking at. Absolutely, that's the way our economy is going.
And just to let you all know, we have about 5 minutes left, so we'll...
Maybe
so
other
one of
folks
you all want to...
I think you're making a great point. From a banking perspective, when we look at it, we actually see a decrease in the number of small businesses over the past several years as opposed to an increase. Historically, we've talked about small business growth as being the big generator for employment growth. That really had not been the case for the past few years, and we've got to figure out how we turn that back around. So we talk about the gig economy, that's important, but what I'm hopeful for, this is a hope, this is not data, I'm hopeful that because people are maybe a little less confident in corporations and more apt to have several sources of income, that'll translate into people wanting to also be more entrepreneurial and looking for ways to be self-employed and be business creators.
Do we have any other questions from the floor?
Yeah, my name is Desiree. I'm almost 65 in a couple of months, and I just retired, but I know a family, we all own real estate. So we do instill into the Gen X's, my daughter, and the millennials home ownership. Because like right now, because in 2006 when the market crashed, you know, my company, we had a lot of problems with the 401k. So at my stage now, I am downsizing, and I can use my money from the sale of my real estate to bump up my retirement. Because my kids, they already have their own property. They don't need another house, you know. But I mean, although I'm retired, I'm still working because I know I'm working with my daughter, you know. And then in the family, even the millennials, they see that home ownership and owning real estate, and my daughter is an entrepreneur, and she is instilling into her kids to be an entrepreneur and work for yourself and own real estate. So that has been part of our generation.
Very good. There's a young lady over here. Just a moment. Go ahead.
Yes, so hello everyone, my name is Leroy Abraham, and I will be speaking on millennials, baby boomers, and Generation X. I think it's only fair to actually hear from a millennial perspective. So myself and my colleague Marquisia Hendricks were both students at Clark-Atlanta University, and when I started my matriculation at Clark-Atlanta University, I came in with a pool of debt, and it wasn't until I went through our financial literacy program where I realized the importance of entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and to build scholarships and accumulating debt. So this year, my sophomore year, I was totally funded through scholarships only, and I didn't have to take out any loans, and it was through education, as you mentioned. I think the missing piece that millennials don't get to have all the time is the education when it comes to entrepreneurship and financial literacy. So now I stand here with my colleagues. We're both business owners. I have my own publishing company called Fiscal Publishing. So I think that once millennials get that education and the knowledge, then they'll be able to flourish into entrepreneurship and real estate and building equity for themselves. So I really just encourage all of the baby boomers and the Generation X. I know that, you know, we can be difficult at times, but to keep, you know, outpouring into us millennials, because as soon as we get the information and the education, we have the drive, we have the motivation, we have the dedication to go for it. I think the missing factor is just that information and education. So I just could encourage all of you guys to continue to outpour to us, and then that will create a shift and a change in our economy.
I think that that's a very key point. Yeah. And to her point, I was just at Clark 2 weeks ago meeting with Dean Davis on the very issue of we need to have real estate, we need to have entrepreneurship in the School of Business, and I'm actually going to be going there to speak because I feel that we do have to bring in those resources, and that's all you guys need is just not even much information. So just a little, and it's all over with. So, yeah.
Yes.
Don't you think that it would be better if you were to start something, let's say in junior high school? Everyone is not college material. So we need to provide a avenue of how a person can make a living. And just because you go to college doesn't guarantee that you're going to make a six-figure salary. So I think those opportunities need to be provided to kids, you know, as far as banking and financial services.
And they are, yeah.
Entrepreneurship, becoming an auto mechanic or
Yeah.
an airline mechanic. Those are very lucrative careers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The technical systems are very good for doing that.
And even at Operation Hope, I mean, Operation Hope has a wonderful program called Banking on the Future for middle and high school students, and they have this business in a box that encourage entrepreneurship. You know, and I think they'll have something here this week or tomorrow where the kids get to pitch their businesses, because really we're all kind of this me economy that we're all capable of generating money. You know, as early as 15 years old. You know, I've seen 13-year-old entrepreneurs. So I think it's there, but I think we do have to be aware of the resources and then drive our kids to them because they need to be around young entrepreneurs and people speaking that language to them.
I think,
Yeah.
but I can tell you, I live in Clayton County, and that's not something that's being
I think there's two pieces to that. I think absolutely the evidence is clear that you can be teaching financial education, entrepreneurship, sort of career planning to kids as young as elementary school, and it can be integrated into the work that they're doing in schools. That is really a state and local matter, and I think if people want to see that, they should be talking to their school superintendents and their state legislatures about how to do it. I think the other thing that holds promise, again, for my friend over here, is access to real financial products, hands-on learning. Kids don't just learn from a lesson, they learn from starting their own business, like the business in the box, opening their own bank account and seeing their money grow. Probably at a fairly small rate of interest these days, but still seeing their money grow. And so, some of the work that we've done has been research, and our colleagues at the FDIC have just put out a paper on, what's the value of starting kids with their own account at a very young age, and really letting them feel empowered to be in the me economy, even when they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old.
With the lemonade stand.
Yeah, exactly.
On the corner. Yeah. Absolutely.
Do we have any other questions or comments from the floor? Yes.
I have a comment related to the young people that are in the military. My son is in the military, and part of the troubling thing that I see, and I work with him on this, and I get so much feedback from him, is that they're, number one, not getting any information about entrepreneurship there, but are ill-prepared when they come out of the military, particularly for those who aren't staying through retirement. And so that's an audience that, particularly African American men, that is such a large group that's there. And I think there's a lot of them that after 4 years, they come out and they're struggling. And maybe that's why the suicide rate is so high. They're just struggling to find a place to where do I fit, even going back to school. They don't have enough marketable skills, enough information, and absolutely not getting enough information about financial literacy, because part of the challenge with them is that they go into the military and then they're approved for everything, and then they get into a lot of debt. So that's another population too that concerns me greatly. I have a 22-year-old son, but I spend a lot of time with him making sure that we go through those pieces, and that when he's in the military, he's actually doing something that's a marketable skill that he can utilize when he comes back to the
Yes, wonderful, wonderful.
That's a great comment. I'm sitting here listening as you were talking, because we spent a lot of time in the banking industry talking to everyone from middle school all the way through college and beyond on financial, and we have tried to focus on how do we become more welcoming, and we want to employ more military, because the discipline and the skills that are learned are very valuable. Now, the transferable skills, depending on what you did in the military, may not always immediately transfer into banking, but it doesn't mean it doesn't transfer to other industries. But I'm not sure we've really given a lot of thought to how could we partner with the armed services to provide a better job of financial education to the military. I don't know that we've really focused on that.
Yeah.
Well, I do know that the veteran, the VA, has, and there are a lot of programs around entrepreneurship and around transferable skills, even in housing, where they're showing people who have come out of the services how to flip houses, how to skill set, and use a lot of those skill sets. So there is a lot of information on the VA's website, and I'm a product of a veteran, and even through with my banking with not Navy Federal, but the other one,
USAA.
USAA, yeah. They kind of take me to the ringer whenever I call, about, if I'm getting a loan or whatever I'm doing, where they really try to pour in home ownership. I mean, they have classes. I mean, they really do, but it's another one of those communities you have to tap into. But I've seen it from afar, and I do know people that have benefited from grants. They give grants for businesses, for entrepreneurship. So there are some resources that the VA is really in tune with providing.
So I'll take one last question, and I know this gentleman had a question here.
Well, actually, it's more a little bit of a comment and a little bit of a question too. As a retired military member, what I have seen as far as transition is concerned, you have to remember And so when you transition out of that, I only wish that we had half as much transition information back when I retired, because we didn't have it.
Yeah.
And so it took me a couple of years to quote unquote readapt to another way of life based upon that. So I'm just going to be blunt. The transition assistance programs that the military has, they stop. Okay? It does. And so we have partnered with an alliance partner that is very, very upfront and forthcoming about how to speak the lingo when you come out. You have a different kind of lingo, so you have to come back to the civilian aspect of how to turn 86 Bravo into, well, I was a truck mechanic.
Right? Yeah.
Or in my case, I was an aircraft mechanic. Everybody doesn't understand that, but if I start rattling off numbers, then people be like, okay, really? So it's all about communication and transparency, and that's what I'm saying. That's one of the biggest issues that I see.
Yeah.
Maybe some of you have seen that, maybe not.
I would say I'm not really in a position to analyze the quality of the programs and how widespread they are, and I haven't, seen the assessment on who they're reaching and how they're reaching. I mean, my understanding is that both the Department of the Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs have realized that this is a priority, especially as, at least over the last couple of years, we've had significant drawdown in the military. I think it is a huge challenge. I think it's a huge challenge to do well, and to do well at the large scale that they need to do it. We have had conversations through Treasury and through in our agency group to assist those agencies in their work around financial education, and particularly in retirement savings, as well as sort of spouse employment and other types of things like that. It's a big challenge, and it's useful to hear the feedback. Clearly, there's probably more that needs to be done, and you should think about how you can be providing that feedback as you work in your communities as well.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up. I want to thank the panelists for this morning. And then they are also available after this. Lunch will stop at 11:30 so that you all know that. And have a lovely day.
Thank you.